As a reminder, we held a first hearing on this topic earlier in the summer, and this second hearing is to clarify and update some of the information that was presented during that time. Once again, I'd like to remind everyone that in March 2020, the city suspended enforcement of the 72-hour parking rule to provide flexibility for residents working from home and following the COVID-19 stay-at-home order and health and safety guidelines. This greatly impacted resident complaints of abandoned vehicles on city streets. In March 2021, the city resumed enforcement of the 72-hour parking rule. Enforcement of removing vehicles has now been prioritized by the Division of Police based on residents reporting inoperable, unsafe, or abandoned vehicles parked long-term in their neighborhoods. Unfortunately, resuming enforcement has not gone far enough in addressing some of the vehicles we are seeing on our streets and in our neighborhoods. Tonight, we will hear from the Division of Parking Services, as well as Columbus Police and the Division of Code Enforcement, to understand how these three entities will work together to address these challenges. With that, I will turn it over to Assistant Director Robert Farron for a presentation.
Thank you, Councilmember Favor. As you mentioned, we did have a public hearing back in July, so we will be focused on some of the additional feedback we heard from the public in your office, focused on those specific code changes. Also, as you mentioned, this is a partnership between three different departments. I'd like to allow Heather and Heather first to introduce herself.
Councilmember Favor, my name is Heather Truesdell. I'm the Administrator of the Code Enforcement Division.
And Lieutenant Kimmerling.
I'm sorry. Good evening, and I'm Lieutenant Ron Kimmerling, CPD from the Property Management Section. We oversee the impound lot.
Thank you both for being here. So I'm going to start actually with handing off to Lieutenant Kimmerling to talk about the some abandoned and junk motor vehicle data. We've updated some of that data. Then we'll go into the proposed code changes and then solicit feedback. Lieutenant Kimmerling?
Thank you. Yes, as you can see there, this is quite an issue in Columbus times. What stood out to me was 2018, we're showing 8,764 complaints. I actually believe that's higher, so that is a large number. We've written over 4,500 tickets then and towed 1,400 vehicles. 19 was fairly similar, and with a year off from not being able to tow the vehicles, obviously we have a lot of ground to make up. I see so far, well, from June 1st to July 31st, we've received over 2,700 complaints via 311. And we have written nearly 700 tickets and towed 178 vehicles. I guarantee that number will go up sharply as we continue. All right. And if you don't have any questions about that right now, we'll pass it on to Heather Truesdale.
Lieutenant Kimmerling, you seem pretty convinced that the numbers will go up. Where is that information coming from?
Yes, ma'am. From speaking with my vehicle impound inspectors that are out there every day, from seeing the volume of 311 complaints. Unfortunately, during that year when we could not tow, we're still working our way through that backlog. Once we opened it up, the floodgates were open, and we know there's areas that we need to work on out there, and it's just going to take a little bit to make up for a year of not being able to address the issue.
And in previous years, pre-COVID, it looks like we were issuing tickets about at a rate of half of the number of 311 complaints that we were receiving. Can you speak to that discrepancy?
Yes. What they try to do, they'll hang a 72-hour notice to give the person the opportunity to move the vehicle. They'll cite the vehicle. And really towing it is somewhat of a last resort due to space concerns at the impound lot as well as the time involved in it. So we generally try to soft this approach first, and towing is really the last resort for us.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Farron?
Thank you. So, again, based on feedback from between July and now, and really in an effort to create consistency amongst the code, this consistency will help staff as well as the general public. There are a couple updates that we've made. One is to repeal 2101.55, the abandoned junk motor vehicle definition. This definition is too close in nature to the definition of junk motor vehicle, which we've also altered in the following bullet point here. And it really does create confusion and loopholes for this type of violation. To create consistency in Title 21 as well as create consistency with code enforcement and the process they have on private property, we are proposing to update Section 2101.56 and rename that inoperable motor vehicle and define it similar to what code enforcement, how code enforcement defines inoperable motor vehicle. That way, for the public, whether it's on private property or a public right-of-way or a public easement, folks are understanding the type of vehicle that we are looking for and the type of vehicle that needs to be removed from the street or private property. I won't go into the details of the definition, but I will mention that this is much more direct in terms of the language and much less ambiguous and will be easier and more efficient to enforce. I would like to ask Heather Truesdale to speak just briefly to the process of enforcing these types of vehicles on private property under their jurisdiction.
So just to clarify, the Code Enforcement Division and the code officers that are assigned to that division are responsible for the enforcement of the zoning code. And within the zoning code is a code section that's 3312.37, parking and keeping inoperable motor vehicles, and pertains to prohibiting and allowing vehicles to be in residential, apartment, institutional, and various C4 districts. It also, as Mr. Farron stated, the purpose of this section deems a vehicle to be inoperable when a number of conditions exist. And so the code enforcement jurisdiction is to primarily take inspections from 311 or complaints and service requests that are assigned through the 311 call center, and do investigations based on those complaints and make a determination whether or not a vehicle that is on private property is in violation of that code. And our internal process, is to issue a zoning citation to the resident or occupant of the property and give the occupant 20 days to comply with the violation notice.
So for clarification for residents who are unfamiliar with the actual definition of inoperable vehicles, as it was currently stated in the zoning code, it's going to be consistent with the new changes if passed by City Council. Is that correct, Mr. Farron?
Yes, as proposed, the code changes in Title 21 will mirror those in the Code Enforcement Division section.
And for folks who are unable to see what those changes are through the PowerPoint presentation, Ms. Truesdale, could you briefly describe what makes a vehicle inoperable?
Sure. The purpose of this section is that motor vehicle is deemed inoperable when one of the following conditions exist: one or more wheels are missing, one or more tires are missing, two or more tires are flat, one or more windows are missing or broken, the windshield is shattered or missing or clearly appear to be severely damaged, parts necessary for the operation of the vehicles are missing, or the license with a distinct number and valid for current year is not displayed thereon.
Thank you. So if a resident has a inoperable vehicle as defined by the code, would that individual receive a citation from the Code Enforcement Department as well as from Lieutenant Kimmerling's team?
From the Code Enforcement Division, it would be a violation notice to the occupants and residents or person in control of the property, giving them 20 days to comply with the citation.
And if you could just clarify for how the police would be called out to enforce the new parking code changes that we're talking about today.
Councilmember Favor, I'll let Lieutenant Camerling answer that one.
Yes, Councilwoman. On that case, we could ticket it, we could tow it immediately, or leave a notice. It would be up to the discretion of my vehicle impound inspector. Obviously, if it goes there, it's missing 2 tires, the windshield's shattered in, it's obviously not drivable. Most likely, it's going to be cited and towed. We will not have to wait on the 72-hour, come back and check on that. That should be relatively quick.
And if a resident makes a complaint about an inoperable vehicle in their community through the 311, how is that call now fielded? Does it go directly to the code enforcement department, or does it go to your team?
That should come to my section if it's parked on a public roadway, something like that. Now, if it's up in a yard, obviously that's going to be code enforcement, but if it's on a roadway, or I believe as we'll go on into the easement, that will fall on my people to come by and do it, as well as any other Columbus officer would have the enforcement authority to take care of that issue.
Okay, great. You're getting exactly where I was leading us to, which is the difference between vehicles being parked in the public right-of-way versus being on private property.
Understood.
So, thank you very much, Lieutenant Camerling.
Yes.
Mr. Farron?
Thank you, Councilmember Favor. So a couple other updates that we are making. The parking infraction fine table has to be updated based on the change to these codes, including removing abandoned junk motor vehicle, the violation and the fine amount, replacing junk motor vehicle with inoperable motor vehicle. And we did mention this in July, but worth repeating, reducing the fine amount for inoperable motor vehicle from $89 to $30 to be in line with the 72-hour rule. That way there's consistency across those fine violations. Also to update 215122 from junk now to inoperable motor vehicle on public property, replacing the 48-hour time limit with a 72-hour limit to be in line with the 72-hour rule, which is a standard rule across the city. Whether a vehicle is inoperable or not, it cannot remain standing, stopped or parked on a street for more than 72 hours without moving at least 75 feet. So now we're creating consistency in those time frames. And then finally repealing 2151.23, junk motor vehicles on private property, and 2151.24, prohibition against leaving junk motor vehicles on private property. As was mentioned before by Ms. Truesdale, because code enforcement has jurisdiction on private property, we are repealing the enforcement of private property violations out of Title 21 in the parking section. Lastly, there were a couple of administrative changes that were made based on the fact that we were digging into Title 21. 2 of these were adding language around collector and historical motor vehicle in 2101.062 and 2101.063. We're mirroring ORC language to have in the Columbus Code, because then we had to update 2137.01, driving unsafe vehicles, adding the exemption for collector and historical vehicles when you are looking at that code section, that violation, driving unsafe vehicles. Those vehicles have certain exemptions per the ORC based on their year, based on the year they were made. And then,
Mr. Farron?
Yes.
Just want to clarify here. We're speaking specifically about collectors' vehicles and historical motor vehicles, making sure that what is consistent in the Ohio Revised Code is consistent with the Columbus City Code. And so does a vehicle need to be registered per the state code in order to fall within either one of those definitions?
yes.
It does. Okay.
And then lastly, we failed to put this on the PowerPoint, but we also did amend, we are proposing to amend 2101.166, the holidays, with the addition of Juneteenth as a recognized city holiday, we're adding that language. That has impacts on our enforcement schedule as well as when parking meters are exempt from being paid.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's the end of our formal presentation. We're happy to field questions and comments.
Mr. Farron, there were about 6 or so different codes that were referenced during your presentation. How many proposed changes are included in the legislation? Do you have is it just those 6?
So the summary of changes under Ordinance 1811-2021, which are Parking Service 2021 code changes, we're proposing to enact 2 new sections, 2101.062, 2101.165, amending several sections, I would say at least a dozen to 15 sections, of which we covered some today, but most were covered in July, and then repealing 4 sections, I believe, all of which we discussed earlier, but based on the parking infraction table as well as the private property sections.
Right, and once again, if someone was to look up the agenda and read the legislation in its entirety and see all of the different various code changes that are being updated or repealed, this is really to make everything consistent across our code, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So the Department of Public Service back in 2018 came forward with a series of parking code modifications to really modernize the system. So, for example, the introduction of the mobile parking app required a code change, of which over half of the revenue coming to the city now is actually via mobile phone now. But we needed to make additional modifications to modernize the system, as well as really create consistencies in making sure that both the public understood the rules, as well as making sure that we had efficiencies across both our division as well as several other divisions.
Lieutenant Kimberly, this question might be for you. Let's say someone is aware of they've received a citation from one of the officers, and they're falling within that 72-hour time window. Are they able to reach out to someone? Let's say they're working on getting the car to the repair shop.
Yes, that's why the vast majority of the time they'll leave a 72-hour notice, and it has the vehicle impound inspector's name and telephone number. They come in every morning, they check their voicemails. We've had several times they're like, hey, it's going to take me 4 to 5 days. I've got somebody coming to get it. They'll make a note of that, and they'll come back and double check. It happens every day.
Sometimes we see vehicles being moved a few feet. Does that count? Does the window, the stop clock start over again?
I would say generally with us, if it's an inoperable motor vehicle, it's been abandoned, they generally don't move. That would fall more under the 72-hour parking where somebody's parking a vehicle and leaving it there for a week at a time, but it does run. The inoperable that this describes, those vehicles generally do not move until we tow them.
Okay.
We do have the 75-foot rule as part of the 72-hour rule, and that would apply to the inoperable motor vehicle on public property. That being said, certainly just as the Lieutenant said, these aren't generally moving. We did put the 75-foot rule in because we have had unique situations where someone would push the vehicle and that would change the mark. We don't anticipate folks pushing those vehicles 75 feet, however.
Okay, so just to clarify, if the vehicle is not moved 75 feet, it still falls within that 72-hour window, could be ticketed and or towed.
Yes, technically, yes.
Okay, thank you. 2151.23 prohibits a person from leaving an inoperable motor vehicle on private property for more than 72 hours with or without permission from the person who owns the property. Can you explain why, even with the permission of the owner, this is prohibited?
(2151.23), Councilmember?
2151.23.
That is one of the sections we're proposing to be
Be repealed?
Yes, to be repealed. Thank you.
All right. You had
based
some-
on the Code Enforcement Division's authority in their section of the code.
Okay, thank you. Are these changes that are being proposed this evening, are they equitable for our most diverse neighborhoods? And do they go far enough to prevent the challenges we've been seeing over the past few years?
Councilmember, I can start first and defer to others if they so choose. I think these code changes are a tool in the toolbox that we need to be more efficient in handling what, as was mentioned before, the numbers, really a really huge issue across the city. This is not atypical to a large city. Every large city has abandoned vehicle challenges. But this will be a tool in the toolbox to help us be more efficient. This will not solve the issue, but I do think that this will help with quality of life and access and public safety. I will also mention that if folks feel like they are receiving tickets either in error or don't deserve that ticket, we have a very transparent ticket appeal process. We've always had one, but now it's more accessible than ever. Folks can appeal the ticket online. They can also call in or come down to the impound, and now they can have their hearing online from the comfort of their own home. So there are options if someone does receive the ticket, but I will emphasize that this is a tool in the toolbox, but this is going to require a lot of partnership between divisions as well as community members in trying to tackle the overall issue here.
With that being said, what does outreach look like? How do we get the message out into our communities that these changes have been made? And this is what you can do should you find yourself in this predicament?
Yes, ma'am. One of the things I would recommend is using like the division COOs or community liaison officers, spreading the word through the block watch, through the civic groups. Most of them are familiar with the need for these changes, and they're, quite frankly, they're clamoring for it. I would try grassroots through that, through the groups that you have contact with, civic groups, everyone. I think they'll all agree this is an issue, and I think you'll get buy-in because most people do want this area cleaned up. And as I said earlier, that's why my impound inspectors generally try the softest approach first, and then we progress from there. So, once they leave the notice, there is someone to call. So I think that's your best bet, and I think the neighborhoods will buy into it because by the numbers we're seeing, they're asking for it, for this to occur.
So it's important to definitely read the warning, the notice that you received. If you fall in this category, reach out to the officer that is his title impound officer?
Impound inspector, yes, ma'am.
Impound inspector immediately. But should the vehicle get towed, how long does a person have before they can no longer get access to their vehicle?
They'll have access to it. They can come down and obtain personal property out of it, so long as they can show proof of ownership. And that could be as simple as having the correct tags on the vehicle. Not having other people's tags, that'll help greatly. They can come down and obtain property. Storage will start 3 days after they've been notified. We'll send them a certified letter to the address listed. So it is important for them to reach out if it does get taken or if they get that notice. And we can somewhat work with them, especially if they call before it's towed.
Perfect. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Yes,
Ms. Truesdale, I know we're specifically talking about vehicles in the public right-of-way, but if a person has a vehicle on their private property and it falls within the inoperable category, what should they do? Should they call code enforcement and let somebody know that they're working on it? What are their options?
Some of their options would be to immediately contact the code officer that issued the violation notice. Again, as I stated earlier, there's 20 days to comply with that notice. And in the zoning code, you also have the ability to file an appeal if you did not agree with the code, or you think there's a discrepancy or we misinterpreted the code. That is also an option, but to contact the supervisor immediately or the code officer immediately and let them know that you received the violation notice or need additional time, certainly we work with folks and the goal is compliance.
Thank you. Is there any additional information that I missed this evening that we would like to cover? Nope. All right. We'll now move into the public testimony portion of the hearing. We have one speaker signed up to provide testimony today. I will ask that the speaker state their name and any organization they may represent. You will have 3 minutes to speak before you will hear a very respectable buzzer. You're welcome to come on up. Ms. Hughes? Tonight we have Heidi Hughes. Welcome to council. And hold on for just a moment.
I think I can speak loud enough.
Mr. Farron is going to allow you to take his seat for the moment. We apologize for that.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Heidi Hughes. I'm a resident in Franklinton. I've lived in Franklinton for 5 years, and I am a religious caller to the 311 system to report inoperable vehicles that line our streets. Yesterday, within a quarter mile, I counted 26 inoperable vehicles from my home to where I work on West Broad Street. I would like the City Council to consider making sure that proper staffing is available to these entities to address the issue. I've been in numerous conversations with Mr. Boggs at Impound. He is one person who I think does his very best to address the issue, but he's one person. He can't possibly address the chronic problem that we have with inoperable vehicles in Franklinton alone. These are vehicles that are up on blocks. They don't have tires, their windshields are broken, and in the 900 block of Campbell Avenue, there were 2 vans that sat for 5 years, filled with contents that did not move. I've engaged our liaison officer who has gone out and spoken to the residents of that home, and they did sell one vehicle or hauled it away, but the other vehicle remains. So it has sat for over 5 years. I would also like to add that I would love to see you consider adding to the inoperable definition of a vehicle also include filled with contents, junk, trash, that makes it impossible for a driver to even get into a vehicle. That is very common on the streets as well in Franklinton. That's all I have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Hughes, for your time this evening. I want to provide the opportunity for our folks here today to provide some feedback on the comments that you made this evening. Lieutenant, if you want to start off for us?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, she is correct. I have 4 vehicle impound inspectors right now to cover the city of Columbus. And Chris Boggs, the gentleman she's speaking of, yeah, he has 5 precincts. 19 precinct to Hilltop is one of them. They do their best to get there. We're looking down the road. I would like to increase staffing. That's an issue for down the road. We're gathering the numbers and the data to justify such a request. That's why I know the numbers they have per person. But we are looking into addressing that.
Do we have an idea on average how much of a backlog we're operating on a daily basis or a weekly basis?
I don't know on a weekly basis. I do know that they are running into a tight timeline with getting the 311s completed during the time frame, the 42 days. One of the things we're looking at out there is, do we extend the time so that they can get it right the first time, so that people don't have to call back in, versus closing it out because we hung a notice on it and then the resident has to call back and start the process again. These are things we've been looking at for the last several weeks, and we're working on internal to try to make the most of what we do have, pending, hopefully, maybe increase in the staffing down the road. But 19 precinct alone is the Hilltop as well as Franklinton. Those are, I would say, probably two of our hot spots that we have. And we knew when we could not tow for a year that was going to impact us, as well as, I think it went on longer, the suspension of enforcing the expired tags went on longer than that. That was a really easy way to try to gain compliance, using the expired tag as well as a notice to help with our compliance. So it's just going to be a matter of digging ourselves out of the hole that we put ourselves in for a year with COVID. But they are working on it.
And this process is completely 311 driven, right?
Yes.
Officers are not combing the streets looking for inoperable vehicles?
Not to my knowledge, they are not. We're predominantly 311. That is where 99% of the vehicle impound inspectors that respond to those, 99% of their work comes from 311 requests from citizens.
Okay. Mr. Farron, did you have any feedback for Mrs. Hughes' comments this evening?
No, Councilmember, I do not.
Has there been consideration to consider what Ms. Hughes referred to as contents that are inside the vehicle? We've all seen it before as being part of a defining characteristic of an inoperable vehicle? Or does the contents usually come in collaboration with other things that we have identified as being inoperable?
I could tell you that the vehicle impound inspectors do note that.
Okay.
When they get a complaint and it's obvious the vehicle hasn't moved and they mark it, I've had them tell me no one could even be in that car, so we know nobody's driven it. Just through anecdotal, I do know that they look at that. But generally, there's other things that lend itself, such as flat tires, obviously not moved, debris under the vehicle, on the vehicle. On top of the wiper blades, you can tell it hasn't been ran since last fall. But we do see that, the personal property piled up, using it basically as storage.
Okay. I will say that it is concerning to hear that there's, I think Ms. Hughes acknowledged, over 20 vehicles on one stretch as she's going to work. And so is there an opportunity for us to take a more geographical approach to filter through the 311 complaints when we know we've got an area that has been problematic for years?
I know we're looking at some better ways to do that. I've been in
Okay.
discussions with the West Side Pride manager about it about 2 weeks ago. And we're looking into that. Unfortunately, with the volume of complaints they have, they're going from one complaint to another one. They're not driving down roads looking for cars that no one's complained on. Unfortunately, that's the danger of the system. We are complaint driven, and unfortunately with that volume, they're driving from the complaint 1 to complaint 2 to complaint 3, and they have to split their days. They might only they might only make it to, let's say, 19 precinct 1 or 2 days a week, and then they have to hit their other precincts as well. But we're looking into some ideas, maybe a way to saturate an area, maybe 1 day a month, with all 4 of the vehicle inspectors, having tow trucks on standby, try to look at trouble spots and hit them that way. Those are all discussions we've been having for about the last 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, this might be an opportunity for us to really explore the capacity of our 311 complaint system and to figure out if there's a way to make that a better process for the officers. So if they've received, 5 complaints in one night from that same strip that Ms. Hughes acknowledged, but then another one on the other opposite side of town, that the officer isn't just hitting one of those in Franklinton and then driving to a whole nother precinct when he could also attack those other 4 complaints
Right,
that were filed in Franklinton.
Yeah, they generally will pick this precinct on this day, and they'll stay on the precinct all day, work that, and then go. But yeah, we're looking into some other ideas. We've been in discussions for about 3 weeks now, trying to come up with a more effective way to do it.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hughes, for your feedback this evening, and for taking time to actually file 311 complaints, because even though we acknowledge that we're receiving on average about 8,000 a year, we know that there's so many that just never get filed to begin with. Are there any additional remarks by anyone today? Okay. Thank you again to Assistant Director Robert Farron with the Division of Parking Services, as well as Lieutenant Kermeling and Code Enforcement Administrator Heather Truesdale for being here with us to share this information. These are important changes to our city code that will assist our officers in being able to remove some of the inoperable vehicles that have long dwelled in our neighborhoods. The goal is to ultimately eliminate blight and keep our streets and public right-of-way safer for our residents. If you would like to offer further thoughts on these concerns, please reach out to the Division of Parking Services at parkingservices@columbus.gov, as well as my office, Tynesha Harden at tyharden@columbus.gov, or Anissa Lieben at aaliban@columbus.gov. Thank you additionally to our CTV team, as well as Ms. Angela Burks and Tynesha Harden for their assistance in hosting tonight's hearing. This concludes our hearing. Everyone have a great evening. Thank you.